Hello everyone and welcome to game 3 of the match, Magnus Carlsen versus Wesley. So, in the first game, Magnus was able to win a very nice game, then Wesley bounced back after that brilliant queen to h5 move and forcing a completely winning endgame. And now we again have a tied match, 2 more games to go today, and let's see what happens in game 3 as games seem to be getting, crazier and crazier by the move. So here, Magnus with the white pieces again, opens with c4 like in the first game, so the English is on the board. We have e5, knight to c3, and now knight to f6. We have knight to f3 and knight to c6, and again we have the 4 knights of the English, much like in the first game. We have d3 and now d5. Striking in the center, we have c captures on d5, knight captures, and then now e4. Attacking this knight, asking, do you want to move the knight away, maybe knight back to f6, you can go to b6, or do you want to capture on c3. So this is exactly what Wesley does. We have knight captures on c3, b captures on c3, and now bishop to c5. We have bishop to e2, and both players now castle. So castles, and we reach a very interesting position. Where Wesley plays king to h8, and now we reach the position that was played in 1986 between none other than Mikhail Tal and Alexander Chernin. The game ended in a draw. Tal continued with rook to b1, and interestingly, rook to b1 is the top move recommended by the engine, and of course Tal knew this in 1986, so no wonder. But here Magnus improves on this with bishop to e3, so it is already as of move 10 that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Wesley deals with this. He decides to capture on e3. It seems like a good idea because you double white spawns, but on the other hand, you will allow white to have support for the d4 push in the future. The e3 pawn will allow this idea. So queen to e7, and now queen to c2 by Magnus. We have f5, and now that the center is being attacked, knight to d2. So now, if captures, this can be captured by the knight, and you don't have to further ruin your pawn structure. So bishop to e6, and now d4 by Magnus, now threatening d5 to win some material here, as it would come with a double attack on the bishop and on the knight. So here, bishop to g5 by Wesley, and now saying, okay, if you push the pawn, I'm just going to capture on e3 with check and pick up the bishop. Or even if you block with the rook, then I'm just going to capture on e4, and it's a really, really bad position. Yes, you are attacking here, but my rook and queen are attacking your rook on f2, so your position just falls apart. So instead, after queen to g5, rook to f3 by Magnus, now keeping an eye on the e3 pawn, and now f captures on e4. Getting ready to remove the defender of the e3 pawn. So knight captures first with an attack on Wesley's queen, queen to h6, and now rook to e1, saying, okay, now if you capture on f3, I can capture back with the bishop, and then the e3 pawn will be nicely defended. So instead, after rook to e1, we have b6, and now we have knight to f2. So what do you play here? We have knight to e7. Now the knight is coming into the game, maybe via f5, maybe via g6, maybe via d5, who knows. So here, queen to e4 by Magnus. Now you have to be careful. If you trade the rook here, then first you're going to lose this one with check, and then Magnus will win the other one. So you don't want to do something like that. So e captures on d4, we have c captures on d4. Now Magnus has a passed e pawn. It's very far away, but at some point the queen might move and the pawn might start marching forward. So rook f to e8, and now comes queen to e5, attacking the c7 pawn. So knight to d5 now, defending with the knight, and the rook now nicely defends the bishop here. Bishop to b5 by Magnus, now attacking the rook and basically baiting Wesley's next move. So rook to e7, and now bishop to c6 with an attack on the knight, on the rook, and saying, okay, now you move this rook, and it doesn't really matter where you're going to move it, because you will lose this knight. And if you play something like rook here, then just bishop captures on d5, of course, is enough for a win, because after rook captures, rook to f8 check, we're going to have to block with the bishop, and then queen captures on d5, and that's it. So this is kind of the main idea. Wesley defends against all of this by playing bishop to g8. He now exposes Carlsen's queen to the attack from the rook on e7, but this is exactly what Magnus wanted, as now we reach the position from the thumbnail, and Magnus plays queen captures on e7. He gives up the queen for 2 rooks, and it's going to be a great game from this moment on. So knight captures on e7, we have bishop captures on a8, and now queen to d6. Wesley centralizes the queen, and now he has to mobilize his other pieces, because if those rooks become active, it could be very, very dangerous. So bishop back to e4 by Magnus, and now c5. Basically, aside from the active pieces, Magnus does have these very strong 2 pawns, so Wesley would very much like to exchange some of them. So rook to d1, but now Wesley doesn't trade here or even captures on a2. Wesley decides to play c4, and this is maybe a bit too much, but you know, who are we to say such things? Now you allow Magnus to keep his two connected central pass pawns, so he goes bishop back to b1. Now this will be protected after the pawn is pushed. Wesley pushes it, and now d5, and this is now already a very nicely advanced pass pawn. Of course, it can be captured. Whatever captures this pawn, just e4, and this is winning for white. So instead, after d5, we have b5. Now Wesley wants to start advancing his other pawns, but now knight to e4, attacking the queen. So the queen has to move, and now bishop to c2. Of course, you cannot allow pawn to c2. So bishop to c2, and now comes knight captures on d5. But now, although you won a pawn, you allow Magnus a very interesting idea, and that is rook to f8. So rook to f8 with the idea of just capturing on d5, the bishop will not be able to move. So here we have knight to e7, just going back with the knight and defending the bishop here. But you could just play something like queen to e7 and attack the rook, because what happens next really can't be stopped. You have to allow this captures, and rook captures on d5, and hope that your queen will be able to fight against bishop, knight, and rook, as you do have some pawns here. So, you know, maybe it's possible. But instead, after rook to f8, knight to e7 was played, but now Magnus gets his other rook to the back rank, rook d to d8 now, and it's not easy holding this. Yes, the knight guards the bishop, but bishop to b3 is coming. There's no stopping that. So here, h6, you have to create some breathing room for the king, but now knight to d6 even, not bishop to b3 right away. Although it looks very, very impressive, c2 is much too powerful now. You don't really have a way of dealing with this. And now if you, of course, just play this, then we get a queen into the game with check, and even this captures with check. King to h7 is not enough. Now you can't capture the pawn because the rook is hanging, and the next move we are getting a queen into the game. So bishop to b3, although is a plan for some occasion, it's not a plan for this occasion. So knight to d6 now, and here Magnus has a very, very clear idea planned, because there's well, not much you can do. If you just continue pushing, the knight to f7 is mate in 1. The bishop cannot capture, and this bishop guards h7. So there's that. So Wesley, of course, has to prevent this. Wesley defends it by playing g6. He creates more breathing room for the king, but now Magnus has a move that completely destroys black's position. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find this incredible move while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on piling up on the defender of the g8 square. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight to c8. As usual, the strongest move is always, you know how it goes. So knight to c8, and now the threat is just, you know, we eliminate the defender of the bishop here, and then rook captures here is enough to win the game. And there's no way, a good way to stop this. So here, queen to e5 was played, going after the e3 pawn, and although you could allow this by playing knight captures and queen captures, there's no reason to do this. Then you allow check, and then, you know, the black queen can keep checking you. So Magnus calmly defends it with king to f2. So king to g7 by Wesley unpins now, so the bishop can move. But now Magnus has to eliminate the knight. So knight captures on e7. We have bishop to f7. If you don't play this, if you play queen captures on e7, then rook captures on g8 again is very deadly. King f7. We're gonna play bishop captures on g6, and after the king moves, you will very slowly but surely win that queen. So king here, king to e5. Now we're just gonna attack the queen, and that's it. So instead, after knight captures on e7, bishop to f7 was played. Now not allowing a rook captures or knight captures bishop here, but knight captures on g6 now. And again, if you capture here, then we get rook to g8. You win this, you win the bishop, and that's it. Two rooks and the bishop, of course, will triumph over a queen. So queen to e6 by Wesley, and now comes bishop to b3 now, attacking the queen and the bishop on f7. So queen to f6 with check. We have knight back to f4, and now queen to h4 with check, hoping for g3 to get queen captures on h2. But Magnus, of course, just advances the king, and now bishop captures on b3, a captures in c2. Wesley now incredibly close to queening his c-pawn, but Magnus says not a problem. Rook to g8 check, king h7, rook h8 check, king g7, rook d to g8 check, king to f7, and now rook to f8 check. And now whatever you play it simply doesn't work. If you go here, then knight g6 check wins the black queen. So king to g7 was played, hoping for a repetition of moves. Maybe it's possible, but here Magnus, after king to g7, played a very interesting move, and that is knight to e6 check. And it was in this position on move 47 that Wesley so resigned the game, as now there is nothing more to be done here. Point is, there is only one move, a king to g6, and now we continue going after the king. We're gonna play rook to g8. If you go here, rook to g7 is checkmate, so you have to bring the king down the board. You have to play king to h5, but now g4 with check. And the point is, after captures and captures, Black even gets a second queen into the game, but it's not enough because knight to f4 or knight to g7 will now be checkmate. So really an impressive game. Game 3 goes to Magnus. He now leads the match 3-1, and Wesley will have his chance to bounce back in the fourth game with the white pieces again to tie the match and go fresh into the second day. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank David Kimura, Nigel Holloway, happy birthday Gavin, Leander Moderson, and happy birthday CCP for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the quarterfinals, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.